Okay, we're going to start Chelik Gimel of the Kovetz. Chelik Gimel speaks about the shaychus of the reward of the mitzvah to the mitzvah. Shaychus of mitzvah l'schara, which in the past halak we focused on what is the definition of the schar of mitzvahs, what is the definition of the reward that Eibush gives to Yidden for their mitzvahs. Chelik Beis focused on the schar mitzvah, how the real schar of every mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. In this Chelik, we're going to focus on the schar that the Eibush gives for mitzvahs. For example, Gan Eden and Elam Haba, how that has a connection to the mitzvahs itself, how that has a connection to each mitzvah and mitzvah. In other words, last chelik we focused on schar mitzvah, how every single mitzvah is in atzmi, that when Yid does a mitzvah, the schar for that mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. On the other hand, we know that each mitzvah has its specific schar. Each mitzvah has a schar for that mitzvah, or in general, the mitzvahs have a schar for Gan Eden. I mean, Gan Eden in Mashiach comes in Elam Haba and Chesam Mesim. What is the connection of that schar, the schar of Elam Haba, to the mitzvah itself? If schar mitzvah, the main part of the mitzvah is the mitzvah itself, why do we have another type of schar? Number one, and also what is the connection? Is there a connection between that type of schar and the mitzvah itself? So this is a chelik that has 4 sichos inside, which bring out 4 different perspectives of the connection of the schar of mitzvahs to the mitzvah itself. So before we start, just a small agdama, that when we define the word schar with the word reward usually means payment. And the definition of payment is that it's basically an exchange for work, an exchange for an object. Just like when you buy an object, you pay money for the object, you pay valuable for the object. It could be either you pay money or there could be khalif and you could change the object for another object. But general payment means that since I gave you something, you now owe me something, and therefore you give me something back in return, something of value, and usually the value is connected to the object that you gave. So if you're going to buy something, if you're going to buy gold, the gold is going to be worth a certain amount of value, so you have to pay the money that type of value. And so when it comes to reward in general, reward or wages that you pay an employer, pays an employee, usually has to have some sort of value, some sort of connection to the work that was done. And in exchange for the work that was done, the employee gets rewarded for that work. So that reward basically is the outcome of the work that was done. Now, even though it's the outcome of the work that was done, it doesn't have a direct connection to the work that was done. If a person could be working in an office, if a person could be working, getting a job, whatever job it is, all jobs get paid in the same type of payment, which is money or anything valuable. But the money that's paid doesn't have a direct connection. In other words, isn't an outcome of the job. The job is to do so and so, and when a person does this, then you pay the value of the job, you pay back. So you basically pay back in value, but it doesn't mean that there's a direct connection between money and the job. Lo yitzur that a person wants to get paid back in a different type of value, whether it could be an object or whether it could be time or whatever it is. So that you can pay back with that value. As long as you pay back value for the job, then that is counted as payment, because the value that you pay back doesn't have a direct connection to the work that was done. As opposed to when they wish to pay Yidden for Torah mitzvahs and they wish to reward Yidden for Torah mitzvahs, it's a little bit different. Why is it a little bit different? Because the reward that we get for a mitzvah is connected to what the mitzvah is itself. And the einish, the punishment that a Yid gets for an aveda, is a direct outcome, a natural outcome of the aveda itself. In other words, if you want to see what type of mitzvah it is, not only the kamos, how big the mitzvah is, etc., but what type of mitzvah it is, what is the mitzvah, you look at the reward of the mitzvah. That's what the Rebbe brings in Tanya, pick up a test. The mischar mitzvah neidem mehusa, that from the reward of the mitzvah we could see what is the mitzvah itself. Because the reward of the mitzvah isn't only a payment for the mitzvah, the reward for the mitzvah is a outcome, a natural outcome of the mitzvah. So the reward of the mitzvah is a package, it comes with the mitzvah itself. And this is the first Nikud that Rebbe brings in the first Sicha of this Chelik, the Gimel, Sicha Hey of the Kovetz. The Rebbe starts bringing the question that the Rebbe brings in Tanya and he gets the tshuva. The Rebbe starts Tanya and gets the tshuva by asking that l'chayda, Kaddish means that a person died before a certain age. We see nowadays that people do Averis, which are Chayiv Kaddish, and they don't pass away. How does that happen? Now, a similar question Tesos has in Masechtas Ksubas. The Gemara in Masechtas Ksubas says that even though we don't have a Beis Din nowadays, but Din Dal Mises, the Din of the 4 types of punishments that we used to get through Beis Din still exists nowadays. That if a person was over an Aveda, that is Chayiv Mises Beis Din, let's say a person was over an Aveda that's Chayiv Skila, so then the Gemara says he's going to fall from a building, which is a fall from a building, which is similar to Skila, etc., etc. So the Din of Dal Mises still apply nowadays. Tesos asks, how do you say the din of the al-misses still applies nowadays? If we see quite a few people who serve Avedas Zara and do Avedas, and they pass away on their deathbed, they pass away by natural death without getting any of the mitzvahs based on. How is that possible? Tesis answers that it could be they did tshuva, and if they did tshuva, then they should get rid of the einish that they're supposed to get. So Tesis says that since they could be they did tshuva, so they don't get the einish that they're supposed to get. So the question is regarding the dal mitzvahs based in. Tesis says that tshuva helps, and the einish, the punishment goes away. So why can the Rebbe answer the same question regarding the einish of Kaddish? The Rebbe starts off asking, how do we see people live with doing Avedas at a Chayiv Kaddish and nothing happens to them? So why can't Al Rebbe answer the same thing as Tesis answered? That tshuva helps, that they did tshuva, and since they did tshuva, they don't pass away early. Now the question is even stronger because by Dal Mrs. Beis Din, usually tshuva doesn't help. Regarding Misa B'dei Adam, when Beis Din have to give a punishment to someone, then it doesn't help that they do tshuva. Since Beis Din can't see if someone really did tshuva or not, so therefore anyone who does an Aveda that is Chayiv Mrs. Beis Din, then they get punished even though they theoretically could have done tshuva. And Tesis still answers that it could be the tshuva. Regarding Kaddish is Misa B'dei Shemayim, and for sure tshuva can help for them. So if so, why isn't the Rebbe answer that tshuva helps for Kaddish? Why is the Rebbe makes such a strong question at the beginning of the Geras Tshuva that we see people live after doing Yisakos, it could be they did Shuvah. So to answer this question, that brings us in the Quran, that's what I bring in this Sugya. But the Chikri Yisrael, that brings from the Shalah, that they have a discussion, what is the definition of the reward and punishment for mitzvah? We'll start with the Schar, and then we'll get to the Einish. When the Eibusha says that if you do a mitzvah, you get the Schar for it. What is the definition of that Schar? So there's two ways of explaining it. Either you could say that the Schar person gets from that mitzvah doesn't have a direct connection to what that mitzvah is. So if a person gets paid back for Shabbos, for example, a person gets Schar for keeping Shabbos, doesn't have a connection to what Shabbos is. A person could do mitzvah Shabbos. Mitzvah Shabbos is to keep the mitzvah every 7 days you should rest. And then the Schar you get for that is because the Eibusha has his ways of giving Schar, which doesn't have any connection to what the mitzvah Shabbos is. Or isn't a direct outcome of the mitzvah is, just like when a person gets paid for wages for working, like we said before, the money that he gets isn't a direct outcome of the work that he did. It doesn't have a direct connection, an internal connection to the work that he did. It has a connection bekamos of how much work you do. That's how much money you get, but it doesn't have be'echos. That doesn't have an internal connection to money and the work that he did. That is one shit. Another way of explaining it is that the mitzvah, that the schar that a person gets for the mitzvahs is like a natural reaction of the mitzvahs. Meaning that the Eibusher put inside the mitzvahs and inside the averes, that when a person does this pula, then naturally what happens is he should get the schar of that pula. When a person does a certain avera, then naturally what happens is you get einish. So when a person gets kares, it's not that the Eibusher is punishing him for his actions. I don't say it's a punishment, but it's a natural outcome of what the person, when a person did avera as chayv kares, the natural outcome of that is that a person gets kares. When a person does a mitzvah, the natural outcome of that mitzvah is that he gets schar. So the schar isn't a foreign concept to the mitzvah itself. The schar is a direct outcome and a natural occurrence that happens after the mitzvah. Now, how does Chassidus paskin? What does Chassidus have to say about this? So Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, because I said before, Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that when we say schar mitzvah, Alter Rebbe explains that from the schar of the mitzvah, you're able to know what the mitzvah and what the Indian, what madrega of the mitzvah is. Mischara neda muhusa. What does it mean mischara neda muhusa? From each mitzvah, what the reward of the mitzvah is, we're able to see what the definition of what the madrega of that mitzvah, what that mitzvah was. Why? Because what causes the schar? What causes the schar is the mitzvah itself. So it's not only that from the reward of the mitzvah we get paid back for the quantity of how much mitzvahs that we did, etc. But also the echos, also the quality of the schar that we get is a direct outcome of what the mitzvah is. And therefore, if you have a mitzvah which is a certain madrega, then it's going to cause a specific type of schar. If you have a mitzvah which is a different type of madrega, then it's going to cause a different type of schar. In the general schar of the world of Elam Haba, if you don't know what mitzvahs are, what the definition of mitzvahs are, you look at what the schar is, Elam Haba. So from the fact that you have schar mitzvah, and schar avera means that Alter Rebbe is taking on the second eifin that we mentioned before, that the mitzvah causes the outcome. The outcome is a direct connection of what the mitzvah is. And the same thing regarding the einish, the punishment that a person gets from the averis that he does, that the punishment they get from the averis that you do is a natural occurrence of what the averis is. And that's why there's a big difference between the averis, which a person gets punished by Beis Din, and the averis that a person gets punished by the Eibusher. When can you say that it's a natural, the einish, the punishment is a natural occurrence from the avera only if you get punished by the Eibusher? When a person does an avera and the Eibusher punishes him through kaddish, etc., so then you could say that a person, that is a natural occurrence of his avera. When a person Beis Din have to punish the person, you can't say that a natural occurrence is that Beis Din are going to punish you. It must be that with the averis that Dalvis is Beis Din, the averis that are punishable by Beis Din are an exception to this rule. Usually we say that the einish is the outcome of the avera. But when the Dal misses, you have to say that there's an exception to the rule, and the exception to the rule is that by these averis that Beis Din are there to punish, that the punishment is not an outcome of the avera. The punishment is a separate thing, and the Eibusher decided for whatever reason that these averis should be punished by Beis Din. What's the difference if it's a natural outcome or not? The difference is whether tshuva helps or not. By the averis which get punished by Beis Din, since the punishment is not a natural outcome of the avera, so you could say that tshuva should help because it's anyway not a natural outcome. When it comes to Yid getting kaddish, Yid getting punished for avera that's chayv kaddish, since it's a natural outcome, then tshuva shouldn't help. Tshuva doesn't disturb that natural occurrence because when you did the avera, you already got that. The einish is already starting already. It's already a natural outcome of the avera. That when you do this, the outcome is that the kaddish happens. So tshuva doesn't help for that. And that's what Alter Rebbe doesn't answer like Tesis. Tesis answers regarding dal misses that a person could do tshuva. I'm shaking regarding kaddish. So here the Alter Rebbe's question is regarding kaddish. Kaddish tshuva doesn't help for kaddish. The Gemara says tshuva does help for kaddish. That's part of Alter Rebbe's question. Alter Rebbe's question is, how can tshuva help for kaddish if kaddish is a natural occurrence of something that happened from the action? This action causes the outcome to happen. It's a natural thing to happen. How does kaddish? Why should tshuva help in the scenario of kaddish? Anyway, what do we see from here? But to get to al sugya of schar mitzvahs, that the reward you get from mitzvahs is different than any other type of reward that we have in Ilmazim. Any reward that we usually have is payment, is an exchange for a certain action. It's not an outcome of that action. It doesn't have any internal connection to that action. When it comes to Torah mitzvahs, the schar that we have for mitzvahs isn't a reward. It's not just the Eibusher is giving us a reward for something that we did. The Eibusher is paying us back. The schar that we have for mitzvahs is an outcome of the mitzvah itself. That each mitzvah has a specific outcome. When you do this, that brings us an outcome. That brings an outcome which is a reward. And by Averis, it brings out a punishment. The punishment is the outcome of that Averis besides by the Averis of the mitzvahs. So what it means is that a mitzvah and the schar are one thing. The mitzvah is one package deal. When you do a mitzvah, comes with the schar itself. It's included in the nature of the mitzvah. Now that's how it works with Gashmis. That's what the Eibusher made. The Eibusher created that a mitzvah. That's what the Eibusher decided the definition of the schar should work according to the mitzvah. The second Sikha brings out this concept even more, but it brings out how it works Baruchis. The Rebbe brings out that in each mitzvah there's 3 stages. The first stage of a mitzvah is, the shayrish of the mitzvah is, that the Eibishter has 613 things that he does, and Mashu Eso Emin Yisrael Lasi, which means that what the Eibishter does, the Eibishter tells Eden to do. So all the mitzvahs that we do are already stage 2. All the mitzvahs that we do are outcomes of the Eibishter's Ratzin, are a reflection of the Eibishter's, what the Eibishter does, he gives us to do. So the shayrish of his mitzvah is what the Eibishter does. The shayrish of mitzvah tefillin is that the Eibishter puts in tefillin, and because the Eibishter puts in tefillin, that's what we do the mitzvah of tefillin. Then you have stage 2, which is the Yid does the mitzvah. That the Yid does the mitzvah down here, which is the Kavanah, that's the Tachas of the mitzvah. The Yid down here should do the mitzvah mitzvah dirim tachtenim. That the mitzvah should be done in a lamazah with a kav gashmi and yoy gashmi. The mitzvah of tefillin should be done in a physical, material way. That is stage 2. Stage 3 is that after Yid does a mitzvah, that has an effect on Maila. The Eibishter Kaviyachal does the mitzvah again. Like it says about Teda, called Teda, Kadosh Baruch Hu, Teda V'Sheni connected. That when Yid learns Teda, the Eibishter learns with him. And the same thing regarding mitzvahs. That when he does a mitzvah, there's an effect on Maila. That the Eibishter does the mitzvah that has an effect on the Kaviyachal, the Eibishter does the mitzvah also. So there's 3 stages of each mitzvah. Now the question is, Maila, the first stage, the shayrish of the mitzvah, that's understood. And the fact that the Eibishter gave us a mitzvah to do down here, that's the Kavanah. But to say that a Yid through his Aveda has an effect on what happens in the Maila, that's against the rules, against the definitions of Nivra, of creation. The definition of a Beira means that he's Be'en Arech to the Nivra, which means that the connection between us and the Eibishter has zero Erech. We have 0 common denominator between us and the Eibishter. And therefore, how can our actions have an effect on Maila? Maila, that our actions should be Tevis Mokim, that's when Sadirim Tachterim. The Eibishter decided that he wants to have a Kavanah, that's going to be Tachterim. And therefore, he told humans like us to do actions in Elam Hazah. Mashenkin, that which our actions should have an effect on Maila, Be'en Nivra, Be'en Arech. We have there's no common denominator between Be'er and Nivra. The things which are complete, which are the most Be'er in the world, is Be'er and Nivra. We're limited and the Eibishter is unlimited. We're definable and the Eibishter is undefinable. Over Mele, how do our actions have an effect on Mele? Elamai. That's what the Eibishter wants. The Eibishter wants Kachal B'Tzeini, which is one of the Yisraelis Achsidis, right from Mal Shem Tov and the Magid, the Havai Tzulcha, that what a Nivra does down here, that has an effect on Mele, that the Eibishter does that with in Kaviyach also. Now the question is why? Why did the Eibishter make it that way? Why did the Eibishter make that our mitzvah should have an effect on Mele? So there's a lot of different beauty in Chassidus on this. Here the Rebbe gives a very basic beer. It's a Sichur from Parshas Bahar, Chelek Gimel in the Sichur. It's a Sichur Vav in the Kovetz. Here the Rebbe gives a very basic beer. The Eibishter wanted that we should get schar from mitzvah. The Eibishter wanted we should get rewarded for what we do. Why did the Eibishter want like that? So the one beer is that the Eibishter gives the Eibishter doesn't take away schar from anything that he does. Anything that does something to the Eibishter gives him schar, even animals, etc. And therefore, the Eibishter wanted to give schar to Yidden for the mitzvahs. Now, if the mitzvahs that we do, well, only because we fulfill the Eibishter's Ratzin and it doesn't have any effect, it doesn't have any impact, Lamaila, or it doesn't have any impact, we don't see any impact coming out of that mitzvah. So then, that which the Eibishter is doing good, that which the Eibishter is giving us schar, the schar is coming not as a connection to the mitzvah that we did. The mitzvah that we did is bein the schar at the beginning. We're getting rewarded because the Eibishter is good, the Eibishter is etzmatayv. But that doesn't have any connection to the action that we did, because the action that we did doesn't have any impact and it didn't ufto and it didn't do anything. We only fulfilled the Eibishter's Ratzin. That which we fulfilled the Eibishter's Ratzin doesn't have, in our terms, we didn't feel like we did anything. Why? Because we're nivroim. And since we're nivroim, even though we did the Eibishter's Ratzin, that's the Eibishter's Ratzin. We didn't feel we did anything in our terms that we should get schar for. And therefore, since the Eibishter is etzmatayv, the Eibishter is the essence of good. The essence of good wants to do good, not only because the Eibishter is the etzmatayv, but that includes in making part of true good means that you don't give na'am l'chsufi, you don't give free bread, you don't give a free schar that doesn't have any connection to the mitzvah that was done. In other words, if the schar was only mitzvah that the Eibishter is the etzmatayv, then it doesn't have any connection to the mitzvah that we did. It has to do because the Eibishter is good, so therefore the Eibishter gives schar. But there's no connection between the schar that the Eibishter gave and mitzvah that we did, because mitzvah that we did it applies to all 613 mitzvahs that we did the Eibishter's Ratzin. And the schar doesn't have any connection to that specific mitzvah. So the Eibishter had to make a new concept that a nivra should be able to defy all odds and have an effect on my law. That our mitzvah is not only should fulfill the Eibishter's Ratzin, but our mitzvah should make the Eibishter do that mitzvah too. Which now means that the Eibishter made a inyan prati. We did something with that mitzvah. We uftud something l'mayla. Now that we uftud something l'mayla, the schar that we get isn't only because the Eibishter is that's matev. It's because we're getting schar on a specific pula that we did. How do we know that pula is worth something? How do we know that pula has something, has a individual, a specific connection to the Eibishter, or something unique about that specific pula? It's because the Eibishter does that pula together with us. So the Eibishter had to invent a whole new concept, which in whole Seder Shtalshus doesn't exist. That a nivra, which by definition is bein arech to bein, a nivra, the definition of a nivra means that he's limited. The definition of a nivra means that he has a definition and he has no connection to anything which is higher than his definition. That nivra can now have an effect on something l'mayla. Why did the Eibishter do that? The Eibishter did that so that the schar that we get should be a primistic schar. The schar that we get should be connected to our actions. The schar, the reward that we get should only be payment for an action that we did that has no connection, but it should be a direct outcome of the mitzvah that we did. So this is a continuation of the connection to the last sikha that we spoke about just now. But the schar that we get from mitzvahs isn't only an external reward, isn't only an external concept that comes through our actions. It's a direct outcome of our actions. And so much so that the Eibishter had to invent a new concept that in Nivra should have an effect on the Eibishter that he should do the mitzvah. Why? That the mitzvah should be a direct connection to the reward that we get. So those are the first sichos of this chilek that speak about how the connection of each mitzvah to that specific reward. Now the shaila is, in the last chilek we spoke about the schar mitzvah. How any reward for mitzvah really isn't isn't a legitimate reward or a legitimate payment for the mitzvah that we did, because the mitzvah means connecting to the Eibishter. The atom of every mitzvah is a shekichanu mitzvah, so that the Eibishter gave us the opportunity to connect to Him, and through doing a mitzvah we don't only fulfill His commandment, we also connect Him in a of tzavtzah b'chibur, that there's a connection. A mitzvah means that there's a connection between the Beida and the Nivra, a connection between us and the Eibishter. And if that's the definition of a mitzvah, the schar mitzvah, that the reward of the mitzvah is that we get to connect with the Beida Elam Manhigay. So the question is, what is the schar prati that we get for every mitzvah? Why are there other scharis? Why did the Eibishter make other schar, specifically schar gashmi? Why do we have Gan Eden? Why are there other rewards that the Eibishter give for mitzvahs if schar mitzvah, if the main thing is the mitzvah itself? So why did the Eibishter make another schar? Not only that, now that the Eibishter did make another schar, so there's two schars of every mitzvah. Number one, schar mitzvah, but also the schar prati, the specific schar for every single mitzvah. The question is, what is the relationship of that schar to the concept of schar mitzvah? So the next sichos we're going to focus on this. Now that we explained that each mitzvah has their specific schar that has a connection to the mitzvah itself, the question is, on the other hand, how that fits together with schar mitzvah. That's when we get into the third sikha, which is sikha zayin of the Kovetz, which is a sikha chelik tezvav, Parshas Vayeshev, the second sikha. The Rebbe stellt sich up on this. It says Vayeshev Yaakov. The Bikish Yaakov, Leisha B'Shabbat, the Yaakov wanted to ask the Eibishter to dwell in peace, and then when he asked the Eibishter to dwell in peace, Kovetz all of Rugs HaSheyesh, that's when the whole story of Yosef happened. So that brings a few questions. What does it mean? Yaakov, Bikish Yaakov, Leisha B'Shabbat. What does it? Why would Yaakov want to be Leisha B'Shabbat? What does that mean? And in Siv Gimel onwards, the Rebbe starts explaining the concept of the schar of mitzvahs. What does it mean? The reward of mitzvahs. And if we say mitzvahs, there's a paradox in mitzvahs. That there's two concepts of mitzvahs which contradict each other. Mitzvah, on the one hand, we emphasize that the schar, the reward for the mitzvah, is the mitzvah itself. Like we explained before, that the etzem thing that he does a mitzvah isn't a commandment, isn't only a commandment. A mitzvah is also tzavtzah b'chibur. The Eibishter put himself into mitzvahs. So when we do a mitzvah, we're not only fulfilling the Eibishter's ratzon, we're connecting to him. And that is the true definition, that is the essence of every single mitzvah. It doesn't make a difference what mitzvah it is, or whether it could be Shabbos, whether it could be a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Any mitzvah that we do, we connect to the Eibishter in the same way of every mitzvah. If so, why do we get schar from mitzvahs? So it's brought down in Medrash that the HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekapeh schar kol bnei. The Eibishter gives schar for everyone. So the Eibishter is extra kind. Even though we do that's a mitzvah, schar mitzvah, the Eibishter gives extra reward for everyone who does something for it. Which means that the reward that we do, on the one hand, has nothing to do with the mitzvah itself. The mitzvah itself, what is a mitzvah? A mitzvah is tzavtzah b'chibur. A mitzvah is a connection to the Eibishter. That is the true reward, and like we explained in the last chilek, there can be nothing comparable to that reward of the opportunity that a yid has to do, a yid has to connect with the Eibishter. That is the highest thing that a nivra can ever reach. Tzavtzah b'chibur with the Eibishter. Why does he get schar? Why do you get Gan Eden? Why do you have to get schar gashmi? Here we're going to focus on schar gashmi. Why do you have to get schar gashmi? Because the Eibishter gives schar to every single yid, every single berry, every single creation that does something for the Eibishter gives schar to. Why? Because the Eibishter, that's matter. The Eibishter is the essence of good, and therefore the Eibishter gives schar to every single nivra. The Eibishter gives schar to everything that does good for him, because he is the essence of good. On the other hand, we mentioned in the past two sichos that the schar from mitzvahs does have a connection to mitzvahs. Number one, like you said before, the shit of the shalah, that the schar of the mitzvah, the reward of mitzvahs, the direct outcome, is a natural outcome of the mitzvah itself. That from the schar, from the reward of the mitzvah, you're able to see what the mitzvah is, what level the mitzvah is, which means that the schar of the mitzvah isn't only a side detail of the Eibishter gives schar to every single nivra, so therefore he also gives schar for mitzvahs. It has a connection to what the mitzvah is, it has a connection to the essence of the mitzvah. So if we say schar mitzvah, the essence of the mitzvah is the mitzvah itself, and the schar is only because the Eibishter gives schar to every single creation, why does the reward of the mitzvah have to have a connection to the mitzvah itself? Why does the Eibishter have to give another reward that has a connection to the mitzvah itself, if that is only an external aspect of the mitzvah? That what you mentioned last sikha, that brings down in the footnote, R19. That what you mentioned in the last sikha, that since the Eibishter, that's matev. The Eibishter wants to give schar that we feel is a technical schar, and therefore the Eibishter himself does the mitzvah after we do it, just in order that it should be that our mitzvah had an effect, our mitzvah did something, that specific mitzvah, and therefore brings a specific schar. So the Rebbe in the footnote is by saying that if the essence of the mitzvah is the mitzvah itself, schar mitzvah, how can you say the Eibishter machadash a whole new concept of the mitzvah that has to do with the external aspect of the mitzvah? If schar of the mitzvah is an external aspect of the mitzvah, it doesn't have to do with what the mitzvah is, you're going to tell me that the Eibishter is going to machadash a fundamental concept That a niver should have a connection to the Eibishter mitzvah, and that the Eibishter Kaviyachol does the mitzvah only because of the schar of the mitzvah. It doesn't make sense. It must be that the schar of the mitzvah is essential to the mitzvah itself. And that's why, since it's essential to the mitzvah itself, the Eibishter Kaviyachol does the mitzvah also does the schar shvin take away. The Eibishter is not going to be a new concept for an external part of the mitzvah that doesn't have to do with the mitzvah itself. The Eibishter won't do a mitzvah Kaviyachol because he wants to give schar, and the mitzvah schar is that it should be b'primis. Because it doesn't have to do with the mitzvah itself. But we have to understand what is the relationship of the schar to the mitzvah. Is the schar an external thing that doesn't have a connection to the mitzvah because we say schar mitzvah? And if we do say schar mitzvah, then what is the definition of the schar? Why do we emphasize that the schar is connected to the internal part of the mitzvah? So the answer is that part of the Ratzon, when the Eibishter wanted that there should be mitzvahs, when the Eibishter wants there should be 613 commandments, 613 things that happen in this world, it's not only that the things in this world should be done. The Eibishter didn't only want that the concept of Shabbos should happen in the world. There's a lot of different kavanas and mitzvahs. The main kavanah is the Rebbeinu. But together with that comes a lot of other aspects of mitzvahs that the Eibishter wanted. Part of the Ratzon mitzvah includes a lot of different pratim. One of those pratim is that the Eibishter wanted that when the mitzvahs happen in this world, there shouldn't only be something which stays abstract of the world. There shouldn't only be something that the Eibishter wanted this should be done, and there's no connection to, we don't see in any way why this has to be done. The Eibishter wanted that mitzvahs should be expressed in this world in a way that the world that it has, the world feels how this is the right thing to do. How the world feels how this is the kavanah sabriya, this is the kavanah, this helps and is essential for the existence of the world. When the Eibishter gave mitzvahs, the Eibishter didn't only give mitzvahs that they should be done. The Eibishter gave mitzvahs that they should express elikus in the world, and part of that is expressing how they're the essential good and purpose of the world's existence. If mitzvahs would only be done in a way that they have no connection to the world's existence, in a way they have no connection, and we don't see how they have an impact on the world, so then the mitzvah didn't fulfill its true kavanah of why the Eibishter made the mitzvah. Part of nachas ruach lefanish shenasa b'tzeini was that the world should adhere why we get mitzvahs. The world should adhere the mitzvah comes from the etzem hatayv, the mitzvah comes from the etzem hatayv, and the mitzvah is essential for the world's existence. That is the kavanah sabriya. That doesn't explain the sikh over here why. But Pashas, that part of the kavanah din b'tachtonim is that the world understands that this is part of his kavanah. The Tachten Gufa understands that this is the kavanah. This is the kavanah of the Tachten. So if mitzvahs didn't have a schar, it's true schar mitzvah, and it's true that the true definition of each mitzvah is that he does the mitzvah because he's connecting to the Eibishter. On the other hand, that doesn't relate to the world in the world's terms. That's something which is emes, but it doesn't have any terms in Elam Hazar. It doesn't have any terms in the Tachten's terms. That doesn't reveal that it's good for the Tachten itself. Since the kavanah is that the Tachten himself should understand that the mitzvahs are the essence of good, and everywhere, any level mitzvah is going to be, it should be revealed that they are essential and good and needed for the existence of the world. So therefore, the schar has to come from the mitzvah itself. Therefore, the Eibishter gives schar. Schar brings out what the mitzvah is. So two things are the two things are true at the same time. In Tadach we say schar mitzvah, which means that the essence of the mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. On the other hand, what is the mitzvah itself? Part of the mitzvah itself is that the mitzvah comes from the Eibishter. And the Eibishter wanted that each mitzvah should be felt how he is needed in the world, and each mitzvah should be felt that has an impact and it comes from the etzem hatayv of the world, is bringing good to the world. And therefore, the Eibishter made the concept of schar, that the schar, each mitzvah naturally should be connected to schar. Each mitzvah should naturally have an outcome of a reward. Because by doing that, you reveal what is the mitzvah, that the mitzvah is coming from the etzem hatayv. We see this concept also in time mitzvahs and the reason of mitzvahs. Even though all mitzvahs come from the Eibishter and all the mitzvahs of the rest of the Eibishter which are higher than time, higher than reason, the essence of each mitzvah is higher than reason, and it stays higher than reason. On the other hand, all mitzvahs, and even the mitzvah paraduma, which is a chayk, all mitzvahs have a time. All mitzvahs have a reason. And the reason why they have a reason is because the Eibishter wanted that they should be felt. The mitzvah should express itself in the terms of Seder Shtalshlos, in the terms of Tamadas. Because that reveals how the mitzvah, where the mitzvah is essential to wherever level it is. And if a mitzvah is in Seder Shtalshlos, it expresses itself in the terms of Seder Shtalshlos. The same thing we get to the schar of mitzvahs. That if the mitzvah comes into Elam Hazar, which Elam Hazar are people which are neshamas beguf, it has to be revealed that the mitzvah itself expresses itself in the terms of Elam Hazar, expresses itself how they're good in the terms of Elam Hazar. Now this concept that the mitzvah expresses themselves that they're good wherever they go, why? Because they come from the etzem hatayv. And wherever you're going to put them, they're going to express themselves that they're good for their surroundings. Why? Because they're be'etzem good. And since they're be'etzem good, wherever they go, they're going to be expressed in a good way. That's still connected to the Eibishter is good. That the Eibishter is etzem hatayv. Since the Eibishter is etzem hatayv, his mitzvah is also etzem hatayv. On the other hand, the nivroim who do the mitzvahs, they're nivroim. The nivroim who do the mitzvahs are still creations. And a nivra bein arech. So in order for a nivra to feel this, that which exists by itself, because the etzem expresses itself in schar, which is a natural occurrence of the mitzvah itself, that exists. But in order for us to feel that, that's making happen also love, that the etzem mitzvah is going to reveal. So now we see only the part of the mitzvah that reveals the way it's good in our world, which is schar gashmi, etc. Las love, we megala the etzem of the mitzvah of schar mitzvah, the etzem of the mitzvah. Not the way the mitzvah expresses itself in the good of this world, but that's on the mitzvah of Schar mitzvah is going to be Megala Das Lavi, which is more than is going to be Nachas Ruach Levei, etc. So we take it from the Sikhi is that these two, the two scharis, the two rewards in the mitzvah, aren't contradicting to each other. Not only they're not contradiction, they complement each other. When is the true definition of Schar mitzvah? When it's able to express itself in a Schar Gashmi, or when it's able to express itself in a reward which has a shaykhus of that specific mitzvah. The last sikh is a sikh from Parshas Vayigash Chilukei. It's a very deep sikh, a very fundamental sikh. But the Rebbe takes this concept of the Schar mitzvahs, the Schar mitzvah, how that fits together with the Schar Los Alavi. And the Rebbe explains, similar to the beer we just explained now, but with a much deeper explanation. So the Rebbe starts from Sif Vav onwards, which this is a Sikha Ches of the Kovetz. So page 89. The Rebbe starts from Sif Vav onwards by explaining the contradictory statements of the Mishnah. Mishnah says, one Mishnah says, on the one hand we say, the one moment of Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim Me'il Hazeh is worth more than Kol Chai L'El Ma'aba. Worth more than the whole L'El Ma'aba. Which means what's the Kavanah, what's the most important? L'El Ma'azeh. On the other hand, the Eibishter gives Schar to Yidin in L'El Ma'aba. A reward has to be more than the Aved itself. A person gets paid more than the actual thing that he does. That's why he's working for the reward. And we talk says in Mishnah is the one moment of pleasure in El Haba is greater than El Mazeh. So the one hand 1 hour in El Hazeh, 1 moment in El Hazeh is much greater than the whole life in El Haba. Not hour in El Madgish, 1 moment in El Haba, since El Haba is the reward from El Hazeh, is worth more than the whole Kol Chai El Hazeh. How do these two things fit together? So the answer is that mitzvahs that we do down here, since they come from Atmos, they don't have a purpose to bring on to something else. The kavanah of mitzvahs is that you should do the mitzvahs itself. Like you said before, it's Schar mitzvah, that we do a mitzvah to connect to the Eibishter itself. And that's why we do the mitzvah. Just like the Eibishter doesn't have any other purpose, doesn't exist for another existence, so to the mitzvah, the things that come from the Eibishter don't exist for another existence. The Eibishter says to do a mitzvah because when you do a mitzvah, you connect to the Eibishter. On the other hand, it says the Eibishter gives Schar for every single thing a person does. So even though it's not the person was created on the days Hashem is created. The person was created for a purpose to do the mitzvah. On the other hand, the Eibishter gives Schar to that person for what he does. What is the Schar? The Schar is that the person could see the outcome of the gilui of what he did. Which that is the general concept of Elam Haba. And Elam Haba, all the Avodah that we did down here would be revealed to Nivroim. That is the Schar that we get from mitzvahs. So on the one hand, from the Nivro's perspective, the Schar that a Nivro gets is much greater than his Avodah. Why? Because the Avodah that he did, the mitzvah that he did, he didn't feel Schar mitzvah. He doesn't feel anything got to do with anything coming out of his Avodah. As opposed to the Schar that he gets from Lasa Lavi is the biggest Schar that he ever gets. And that's like why we say, because the time that he gets from Elam Haba, the Nivro's perspective is much higher than the mitzvah itself. On the other hand, from the Eibishter's perspective, from the Beida's perspective, is Yafa Shavah Shach and Tshuva Ma'asim Kol Chai Elam Haba. Elam Haba is the kavan. When you do a mitzvah Elam Haba, you connect to the Eibishter. You call Nachas Ruach HaBeida. You call Nachas Ruach to the Eibishter. So from the Nivro's perspective, the Nachas Ruach, the Nivro's pleasure. Where's the Nivro's pleasure in Elam Haba? The Eibishter's pleasure, where's the Eibishter's pleasure in Elam Haba? So if you say that that's Pshat, how you answer the stira, you may have 2 questions. Number 1, the reward that we get from mitzvahs doesn't have any value compared to the Avodah that we do. The Avodah that we do is we cause Nachas Ruach to the Eibishter, which means that we're causing Nachas Ruach to the Beidah on the Eibishter's terms, the Eibishter's perspective. And what reward do we get? We get rewarded according to our perspective, which means that the mitzvah that we did is much more valuable than the Schar. So it's not a Schar. We don't get paid back for our Avodah. The Eibishter is in a Kadosh Baruch Hu Mekapeh Schar called Beria. The Schar that we get isn't a true Schar. We don't get paid back. We don't get paid back value compared to the Avodah that we did. And number 2, we know the Tachlis is Yemei Mashiach. The Tachlis is Elam Haba. The purpose of Elam Hazeh is that Yemei Mashiach and Tchis HaMesim. That's the purpose of Elam Hazeh. Now, if that's the purpose of Elam Hazeh, how can we say that the purpose is now? Here we're saying that the purpose is Schar mitzvah. The purpose of the mitzvah is that when he does the mitzvah, then if you fulfill the Eibishter's Ratzon, then if you fulfill the Eibishter's Kavanah, that is the true completion of the Eibishter's Ratzon. That which a person gets Schar, that's something because that's something which has nothing to do with the mitzvah itself. So if it has nothing to do with the mitzvah itself, why is that the completion of creation? Why does it come after our Aveda we get to there? It's mashma that the completion, that which gets Schar isn't only because technically after we finish the Aveda, that's when the Eibishter gives us Schar. It's a hemshech of Elam Hazeh, that the Aveda we do now is going to be completed and expressed. So Las Lavi isn't only a side prat in our Aveda. That is the kavanah and the purpose of our Aveda. Here we're saying that just like Atmos doesn't have any means to an end, the Atmos doesn't have any isn't dependent on anything else. So to a mitzvah, the purpose is in the mitzvah itself, and doesn't have any connection to any outcome, any schar, etc., etc. So how do these two things fit together? To explain this, the Rebbe goes into one of the deepest, this is one of the deepest concepts of Chassidus. I'm going to say over Bekitzer just to finish up the sugya. The Rebbe goes into the concept of Atzmos. What does it mean? Atzmos, what does it mean? Amshachas Atzmos, etc. So B'derech Klal, we're not going to go into the whole arichos over here. But B'derech Klal, everything in this world is split into two. It's split into Gilui and Halam. Everything in the world is split into expression and concealment. B'derech Klal, this is the difference between Gashmis and Ruchnis. Something which is physical, something which is spiritual. Something which is physical has to express itself in the Gdanos Van Amokim. Something which is physical has to express itself in a tangible way. If not, it's not physical. The definition of physical means that it has Vav Ksavis, has Milo Mato, Mizach Ma'ariv Dorim Mitzvah, which means it has 6 directions. And that is the definition of something Gashmi. And the reason why something Gashmi has to express itself, because the lower something is, the more expressive it has to be. Since Gashmi is Tachas HaYeshus, every single thing which is created by Gashmi, that definition is that it feels itself. Something which feels itself has to express itself in a tangible way. He has to say that I exist. And if he doesn't exist in a tangible way, then he doesn't exist. As opposed to something ruchni, something which is spiritual. Something which is spiritual doesn't exist with definitions. Something which is spiritual, you can't define its existence. You can't say it exists because it's in a certain space. It exists because it exists. For example, if you have the concept of fire, right? As compared to fire, the most spiritual existence that we have in Begashmis is fire. Why? Because fire, where does fire exist? Fire exists where it exists, but if you want to take a flame, how many fires can you light from a fire? Unlimited. Bleak vul. Why can you light bleak vul things from fire? Because fire doesn't exist because he expresses itself. Fire doesn't exist because he takes up space. The existence of fire is because he exists. And since he exists, he doesn't have any limitations whatsoever. In other words, if something is existing because it has to express itself, if something is existing because he has to prove his existence, so his existence is expressed in wherever it expresses itself. And if it's not expressed itself, then it's not there. But something that exists because he exists, or in other words, something which exists without any definitions, his existence isn't defined by the regular definitions of existence. So even if you don't see him, he's still there. And you can't define his existence. You can't say that he's here and not there. Why? Because his existence isn't parallel to expression. His existence doesn't have to express itself in a specific way. He's there. And that's what B'derech Klal is. Ruchni. Gashmis means that he exists because he expressed himself in a physical way. Ruchni, something which is spiritual, a Svara, for example, exists everywhere isn't bound by the places of time and space. Every single time and every single space, once it's brought into the world, or especially if it's pure logic, like the Svara of doesn't exist in a specific space. There's no physical space that exists. You can't say it exists in America and not somewhere else. It exists wherever you are in the world, that it exists. And if you go more general, the reason why these two things are Gashmis and Ruchnis, the reason why their existence is dependent on whether they express themselves or not. Gashmis is dependent on showing that he exists. The reason of anything Gashmi has to show that he exists to someone else. As opposed to Ruchnis doesn't exist because he wants to show that he exists. Ruchnis exists because he's true. Something which is honest. Something which exists in his own right, he exists because he is legitimate. Gashmis, by definition, isn't legitimate. But someone put it here. Anything Gashmi means that it was put here. If it was put, it means that the space existed before it was put here. If you have a table, the table was created by someone who put the table together, which means that before the person put the table together, there was no table. Why is the table here? Because he serves a purpose. That table is always going to have to legitimize its existence. Nivraim are the same thing, any nivra in general. Anything which exists in the physical realm exists because they have to put him here. So we're always justifying our existence by expressing our existence. Size, if it's an expression in Yeshus, if it's an expression in Begashmis. Anything Begashmis has to express itself. As opposed to when it comes to Ruchnis is something which is more connected to Eibishter. Ruchnis exists because, Likkutei exists because it's the truth. Mitzius means that he exists without expressing itself. Built in Mitzias Nimtza. What does it mean that Rambam describes the Eibishter as built in Mitzias Nimtza? He's found, but he's not in Mitzias Nimtza. He's not found like regular things are found. He's found without being found. Why did Rambam find that definition to describe Atzmos, to describe the Eibishter? Because the Rambam is describing the only thing that could be found without being found is something which exists without having to prove himself. He's mechoyed Atzmos. He exists without having to prove himself. Since he exists without having to prove himself, so he's built in Mitzias Nimtza. In general, that is the difference between Etzem and Giluyim. Giluyim means the way Likkutei expresses itself. The Eibishter decided that he's going to create a concept called and Gilui. That means that Likkutei is going to express itself. Eventually, the Eibishter wanted to have said Ishtalshlus. In order for that to happen, there had to be a concept of means as a Gilui. What's it revealing? It's revealing a certain expression of the Eibishter. And the second you have a certain expression of the Eibishter, that by definition means that he's limited. That by definition means that he has some sort of serious, he has some sort of texture, because when you're revealing something, you have to reveal something. There's something that's being revealed. There's a nimtzak that's being revealed. As opposed to Atzmos is Etzem Bulti Mispashit. Etzem Bilti Mizgala, Atzmus is in Mizgala. Why isn't Atzmus Mizgala? Because the concept of expression, the concept of revelation to something else, not even something else. The concept of expression in general is against the Tchunos of Atzmus, like we explained in Ton. And therefore, when it comes to when we do mitzvahs in Olam Hazeh, and we say that the Schar mitzvah, the main thing of a mitzvah is the etzem, the essence of the mitzvah is connecting to the etzem of the Eibishter. That which, there's nothing that comes out of the mitzvah, that which we don't see any schar, we don't see any revealed reward of the mitzvah, doesn't have anything to do with the legitimacy of the mitzvah. The mitzvah is emes. Why? Because it's connected to the Eibishter, which is atzmos, and atzmos is emes. It doesn't have to express itself in any way. Adrabah, the fact that it doesn't express itself in any way, that is a proof that it comes from atzmos. If it did express itself in a way, if mitzvahs did express themselves in an impact in the world, if mitzvah did express itself in a schar, or even in an impact, which means the hamshach of the mitzvah will be revealed as soon as you do the mitzvah, that would mean that it comes from a revealed part of the Eibishter, not the essence of the Eibishter. The proof that we know that a mitzvah comes from atzmos is that there's no, besides doing what the Eibishter wants, there's nothing else that comes out of the mitzvah. It's done with the chayfetz gachmi, with a physical object, in the physical world of Olam Hazeh. And after that is able to be a kli, is able to be a receptor for atzmos, because atzmos doesn't have to be nisgala. The fact that you could do something for the Eibishter in this world and not see any revelation of Likkutei means that it's connected to atzmos. Just like atzmos is found here without it being expressed in any way, in any revealed way, without it being expressed in any definitions, so too, a mitzvah could be done in this world without any definitions. What does it mean without any definitions? Without it being expressed in any revealed schar, it could be without any revealed good, without any revealed amshach in this world. So that's why mitzvahs are usually, the kavanah of mitzvahs is yofa shal achad v'shuv ma'asim tevim el mazeh. The kavanah is after el mazeh, not in el haba, because in el haba and in general Gan Eden are all giluim of the Eibishter, which means that they all bring out a certain aspect of Likkutei, or a certain gilui of Likkutei, which is in the essence of the Eibishter. Dafkin el mazeh, where el mazeh is tach t'shin tach l'mat l'men, where there is no revelation of the Eibishter, that itself makes that it should be a kli for the gilui of atmos. That is the way Chassidus usually explains the concept of yafa sha'achas v'shuv ma'asim tevim el mazeh, because in el mazeh you have amshach of atmos, because atmos is El Mazeh is tachnish and tachnish menu. That's why Likkutei is nimshach atmos is nimshach dafkin El Mazeh. Here comes the Rebbe and says another whole side of the coin. Even though we're explaining in Tona that atmos isn't moved in any definitions, it's undefinable. Since it's undefinable, it doesn't express itself in any definitions, which means it stays behelm. If you say atmos is moved, atmos is defined for not expressing itself, that itself is a definition. In other words, saying undefinable is also a definition. Saying undefinable is also a definition. When we say undefinable, what we're basically saying is that you have a concept of definition, you have a concept of expression, where something expresses something in a specific aspect. And then you have something which is higher than expression. Now, if that concept of higher than expression has to stay that way, then anything that we say that is higher than expression is all relative to expression. Which means that we're saying that he's not truly undefinable. He's undefinable compared to the definitions that we know about what undefinable means. The true concept of Bilti Mitzias Nimtza, or the true concept of Mechuyev Mitzias, means that he has no definition whatsoever. There's no ways, there's no rules that define him whatsoever. The second is a rule that defines him, even if it's a rule which comes from shleimus, which comes from saying that he's undefinable. The fact that he's saying he's undefinable means that he's undefinable relative to your understanding, relative to your description. And when it comes to Atmos, Atmos isn't undefinable because we don't understand Atmos. Atmos is not definable because that's the emes. The emes is that the Eibishter is Bilti Mitzias Nimtza. The emes is that there are no definitions that could define the Eibishter in any way. The only definition that could be defined to the Eibishter is that the Eibishter is a nimtza, that is an existence, and that's the only thing we know about him. What type of existence? What can the existence do? Nivroim, we're never going to be able to understand, no matter how much Chassidus we can learn. We can never understand what it means that the Eibishter is undefinable. Because any understanding that we have of what undefinable means has to be connected to a definable concept. Once we know what something is definable, so then we can understand something which is undefinable. In other words, once we know what expression means, or gilui means giluim, then we can understand that something which is higher than giluim. When it comes to Atmos, Atmos isn't mukded, Atmos isn't defined in any gather whatsoever. So even though Chassidus usually explains that Atmos is Etzem Bilti Mizgala, that Etzem doesn't reveal itself, because the concept of revelation is opposite, kaviyachol, of the definition of Atmos, but that's all kaviyachol limitation on Atmos. Here the Rebbe is saying that the true definition of Etzem means that he's undefinable in any way. There is no rules of how he expresses himself, he doesn't express himself, etc. Whether we understand it, whether we don't understand. And that's the true definition of Atmos. So even though we explained before that Yafa Shav Acha Shach Shuv Ma'asim Tevim Elam Hazeh, we call Chay Elam Haba, the Atmos doesn't express itself. Dafkin Elam Hazeh. The one moment of Elam Hazeh is greater than the Chay Elam Haba because, especially because it doesn't express itself, that is a proof that it's Atmos. On the other hand, if that never expresses itself in any gilui whatsoever, so that means that we don't know that Amshach is a true definition of Atmos. It doesn't express itself in any gilui whatsoever. There's no way of us saying that it's truly undefinable. Because if it had to stay behalim, is it right that it doesn't come from atmos? Is it right that it has some sort of definition? So even though we call atmos b'shem hamushal, we call it undefinable b'shem hamushal, but it's not truly undefinable. Truly undefinable means it doesn't have any definition whatsoever, not because we can't define it, because it's b'etzem undefinable. And if it's b'etzem undefinable, then it could be gilui, it could be halim, whether you understand it, whether you don't understand it. It's not negeh, because it's truly undefinable. And that's why the Eibishter gives schar in Elam Haba. Elam Haba is the expression of the gilui atzmos in Elam Hazeh. The giluim, we're going to be able to see all the amshach doing mamshach in Elam Hazeh of our mitzvahs. That's going to express itself in Elam Haba. That's going to express itself. Mashiach comes, that the nachas ruach, that the pleasure we gained to the we gave the Eibishter through a mitzvah, a schar mitzvah, that's going to be nizgale, that's going to express itself l'asalavi. Why does it have to express itself l'asalavi? Because if it doesn't express itself l'asalavi, there's no proof that the amshach that we had in Golus was from atmos. It could be that it was from atmos, but if it doesn't express itself, then there's no way of defining that this comes from atmos. So in other words, you have the etzem content of schar mitzvah, you have the amshach atmos which comes from the mitzvah itself, and then you have the way that's nizgale l'asalavi. So if there's galus, the gila, the expression, the schar that we have l'asalavi, is it a separate inyan? Is it a separate concept of the mitzvah itself? It's not a separate inyan in the concept itself. The mitzvah has to express itself. If it doesn't express itself, then that's kaviyachol defining what the mitzvah is. It's defining that the amshach of atmos has to stay behind. How do we know that the mitzvah is truly amshach atmos? How do we know the shreish of the mitzvah? How do we truly know what a mitzvah is when that is nizgal? How do we know the true definition of atmos, the true indefinition of atmos, when atmos is nizgal and break any definition whatsoever? Then you know that it's a true amshach of atmos. So both things are true. Because the kavan is afkan atmos. On the other hand, Elam Haba is a mile in Elam Hazeh. What's the mile of Elam Haba? Elam Haba is megale what the kavan of Elam Hazeh is. Elam Haba is megale what amshach happened when he did the mitzvah of Elam Hazeh. So both are equally important because they both match each other. If not for the gilui of the schar l'asalavi, then we wouldn't have the true derher and what the mitzvah is. So the kavan is afkan Elam Hazeh. But the schar, what the schar does, the schar reveals what the mitzvah is. The schar reveals how undefinable the amshach of the mitzvah was when a person did the mitzvah of Elam Hazeh. So that's how both things are true at the same time. Now that we say because both are true at the same time, both have the milas. So what comes out from here is that the schar of the mitzvah isn't only a side part. The schar of the mitzvah isn't only a side note to the mitzvah. Isn't only an external force of the mitzvah. The schar of the mitzvah is negea to the etzem mitzvah. The schar of the mitzvah is negea. It's not only like I mentioned, the schar mitzvah is to express the etzem of the mitzvah or the true purpose of the mitzvah. What the schar mitzvah does, what the schar l'asalavi does, it defines what amshach is the mitzvah. It defines the true bilti agdara, the true undefinition of what the mitzvah is.